Hey there, YouTubers. Kitten Hoarder here, and you're watching Session Report, the show that takes you to the gamer's table to share in the surprises that come out during play. Today I will be playing, as should be obvious at this point, Darkest Night by Jeremy Leonard. It is an excellent game published by Victory Point Games, and they are currently running a Kickstarter for the second edition of the game. Which I will probably not be backing, not because I dislike the game. As you can see, I have everything published for it. The Necromancer bundle, which comes with the first two expansions, as well as the third and fourth expansion. And in fact, the reason that I will not choose to upgrade my current edition to the second edition is pretty simple, actually. I actually prefer the aesthetic of the first edition. I like this board, which the new edition, I believe, has the locations on the board are a bit larger, the overall thing is a bit more colorful, and the cards are, I believe, more detailed. They don't just have this, what I think is actually a really cool aesthetic, which is this sort of weathered parchment-y material background for all of the different components, including the board, which appears to be an old faded map, and then each character is defined simply by an icon that is that character's sort of basic basis for their iconography. And then on the front of the cards you have the various abilities that all incorporate that icon in some way. And I don't feel the need to splash a bunch of other colorful art on here. I think this simple, for lack of a better word, aesthetic is, I think, something that I really appreciate about the game. And I don't really feel the need to change out these standees for plastic miniatures, so long story short, I'm definitely going to be sticking with this, but I felt that it would be good timing to record a video of one of my favorite games, so that other people who do not already own the first edition might get a look at it and see if they would like to get in on it for the second edition Kickstarter. So, I have not actually finished setting up the game currently, as you probably can tell, and the reason for that is pretty simple. I wanted to share my method for choosing a character. As you can see, having all of the expansions plus all of the promo characters, I have a lot to choose from. And one thing that has happened to me and many other owners of the game is that at some point in the production of the game, of the first edition of the game, Victory Point changed their format. So their card, I guess, cut, the way that they cut their cards changed, and that affected the character cards to a small degree, these actual cards that go into the decks, and to a larger degree it affected the larger character cards, the character, I guess, profile cards. If you look at them side by side, you might notice that one is quite a bit larger than the other one. It's more obvious if you put one on top of the other. So you can see there's about maybe half an inch of space sticking out to the side if I lay it on top of the other one. And this creates a problem if you would like to, for instance, shuffle up the cards to draw some randomly. So, while it is, of course, more complicated than it ideally ought to be to select a character randomly, it is far from impossible. And my method is probably not the only person to think of this, but I have seen some people complain about the mismatched card sizes and how it makes it difficult for them to choose a character, so I thought I'd share it. It's easy enough. You take these character standees, which Victory Point Games has thoughtfully provided, and you just shuffle them up here, and you just pick 4 randomly. Or you could pick 2 and then choose 2 of your own choosing, because team building in this game is fairly important. You want to have characters that can do specific things, not 4 characters who all have the same specializations. By the way, this is a 4-character game exclusively. You could play it with 5 characters. There is a variant for it. I don't know how good it is. And if you want to play with fewer than 4 people, you're still going to play with 4 characters. And I'm fine with that. This is something that is simple enough to manage the 4 characters that perfectly fine playing it solitaire, and with more people it would be even easier. Alright, so I have done my random shuffle. I have pulled out 4 characters. Actually, I ended up replacing one of them because I just wanted to see one of the characters I haven't played yet. And also because I thought there was a little bit of redundancy in my team. But let's take a look at what I do have. I have the Valkyrie, who I believe is from the... not this one, from the Abyss expansion. Yeah, there she is, right there on front and center. I have the Mercenary, who I believe is one of the promo characters. I have the Tamer, whom I believe is from the Tales of Old. That's a newest expansion, and there he or she is front and center, I believe. I think I see breasts. Let me see. Well, actually, it'll say here. The Tamer is a friend to creatures great and small. Blah, 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 blah. She can set them to tasks. Yes, actually, something that I quite like about this game is that the female characters are roughly proportionally as common as the male characters, are not sexualized in any way, and are often very powerful. If we take a look at the... one of my favorites is the Knight, I believe it is. It might be the Paladin. No, there's the Knight. So yeah, one of my favorites here is the Knight, who, as it turns out, is actually a female character. And it's not immediately obvious from the character design. I mean, I guess you can tell that she has, I guess, room in her breastplate, for lack of a better term. But she's definitely not sexualized in any way. She's got what seems to be pretty practical plate mail armor. And that's something that I really appreciate. And aside from her character portrait, her gender is not really that important to her character. It's not mentioned in any particular place. And you see that with a lot of the characters. And I think in general, in addition to the not so typical gender representations for fantasy genre, you also have some not so typical representations in general of some pretty common classes. And we might see some of that. I'm not sure. I haven't played with the majority of these characters yet, but we'll see. So I'm going to get finished setting up the game, and then I'm going to probably do my normal thing where I spend a little bit of time explaining how the game works, and then get started on the actual play. Alright, one final thing before I finish packing everything else up. These are 3 extra elements to the game that are introduced in expansions that I will not be using in this game. I actually have dabbled with a few of these. I don't think I've tried the mystery cards yet, but I've dabbled with the other ones. And while I find that they do add some nice, interesting elements to the game, I'm actually quite happy with just the base mechanics, with some of these new characters added in. There is one expansion that I do recommend adding in almost immediately. Actually, I recommend adding it in immediately, and that is the On Shifting Winds expansion. Right. The other expansions all add new game elements. The Darkest Night with an Inner Light expansion adds quests. The, what is it called? From the Abyss adds these darkness cards, which are very, very cool. And the, in Tales of Old adds these mystery cards. But the Shifting Winds doesn't really add anything in terms of new mechanics. It does, however, add new map cards. And with these new map cards, you get new blights and new rewards for searching and scouting in these maps. And that is something that I think is more valuable than any of these other new mechanics in terms of increasing the variety of the game. With just the base set of map cards and blights, it does get a little bit repetitive. And you also, what I think is a bigger problem, is you might find yourself being asked to put blights on the board that you no longer have. And this comes up more frequently than I feel it ought to. There is a rule for dealing with it, but I'd much rather have the sort of variety of blights so that I don't need to deal with that. Plus, it's always cool to get all of the different rewards for searching in the location, and some of the ones from the expansion are pretty powerful and nice to have. I'm also going to be playing with the new map cards from expansion number 4 in Tales of Old, so that's going to come with its own set of new blights and new rewards. Other than that, though, I'm not going to be adding in any expansion content except for the characters themselves. So briefly, what I'm going to be leaving out, these quest cards. This is most people's favorite expansion, and I can sort of see why. This gives you quests, for lack of a better term. It's exactly what they are. These are things that'll pop up in specific locations across the board, and you need to go to that location and try to make progress in the quest. If you are able to make progress in the quest and complete it before it expires, because these quests have like an expiration date on them, then you get a nice reward. However, if it expires before you've completed it, you get a penalty. So this adds a lot more narrative to the game, and it also adds more variability, more things going on. Some people feel that the game is a little bit scripted once you have learned the basic strategies. I don't necessarily feel that way once you get all the different characters into the mix, but this definitely, if you do have that problem, the quest will alleviate that. For me, I actually like the minimalist narrative of the basic game, so I'm going to leave the quests out for now. I'll probably do some more playthroughs later on, maybe not immediately, but I'm going to try to do some playthroughs introducing these various elements, and I'll record those as well. The darkness cards. Now this is something that's pretty interesting because the quest cards have a positive and a negative. The darkness cards only make the game harder. And what they do is at various points as the darkness track creeps up, and again I'll get more into the darkness track when I explain the game, at various points though you're going to draw a darkness card. And that's going to give you either a one-time bad occurrence, or much more common, a bad sort of permanent rule change for the rest of the game. So an example is the Anchor. When the Necromancer leaves a location with no heroes, activate this card in that location. When it's active, a success when fighting the Necromancer has no effect unless there is a hero in this location. So basically, if this is in effect, you're going to have your heroes spread out on the board. They can't all just be gathered around the Necromancer to fight the Necromancer. And if a hero successfully fights the Necromancer at any location other than the swamp, the Necromancer moves to the swamp instead of the usual effect. So basically you can only kill the Necromancer while he's in the swamp. So all sorts of really cool little narrative things here too. And they do make the game harder, and harder in more various ways. So again, it changes up the strategy if you feel that that is a little too scripted or generic. And finally, the mystery cards. These are the newest edition, and these change how you find the holy relics, which are pretty much the main, actually the only way to beat the game. You must find at least one holy relic, and you'll either find one holy relic and defeat the Necromancer, or you'll find 4 holy relics and bring them all to the monastery. So these mystery cards change how that happens. Normally you gather keys and use the keys to get the relics. Here you spend the keys to solve these mysteries, and then the mysteries help you eventually get those holy relics. And I have not really played around with these, but this is another really cool, I think, addition to the game. One thing that I'm constantly impressed by is how Jeremy Leonard never seems to lose his creative touch, right? He's always coming up with new ideas for the game, both in terms of new character decks. The magnitude of the amount of characters is amazing, considering that each character is its own complete deck of powers, not just one or two powers as in an Arkham Horror type of game. And then also these new elements. So he never seems to get tired with working with this game, and that's something that I personally enjoy because I love the game, and I especially love to see all the new characters coming out. But that was a long preamble. I'm going to get this stuff back in the box, get the board set up, and explain the basics. Then we're going to go into the playthrough. Alright, we're back. Everything is set up, with the exception of the final few steps, which I wanted to save for you, and I'm ready to explain. So, the first thing you need to understand about Darkest Night is its premise. I think once you understand the premise, then a lot of other things sort of fall into place. So, most fantasy stories, or many fantasy stories, involve a battle of good versus evil. And evil is quite often represented by an evil necromancer, right? A wizard who dabbles in the magic of life and death. Right? This is somebody who betrays the natural order of things and represents both the sort of devastating power of death, but also this sort of, what's the word? This sort of like perversion of the miracle of life, right? By bringing life to these corpses. I don't want to get into a whole dissertation on it, but basically, this is a pretty common setup. Right, we have the forces of good, usually supported by some divine will, versus the force of darkness, represented by this necromancer. And usually the heroes somehow band together and put the necromancer back into his place, destroy him for good, or at least put him to sleep in some sort of way, to make sure he's not a threat anymore. In Darkest Night, the battle of good versus evil has already occurred, and the necromancer has won. So this is a fantasy world in which the necromancer has basically already subdued the masses. So think of maybe, think of like Lord of the Rings, right? Under the reign of Sauron, right? So everywhere you visit, it's been a little while since I've read the books, but think about like when the hobbits are basically on the first leg of their journey and they get to Bree, and it's sort of, you know, the agents of the necromancer are sort of already at work there, and they're not sure who they can trust. And you have the Black Riders and blah, 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 blah. In any case, I'm not going to get into Lord of the Rings here. We're talking about Darkest Night. So that's the premise here. Necromancer has already won. All of the land is being besieged by his blights. All of the subjects of the land are under his control. And the 4 remaining heroes are sort of cooped up in the monastery, which is the last bastion of light and good in the entire kingdom. This is the only place that is, for now, safe from the necromancer's influence. And the goal of the game is to destroy the necromancer. You have 2 methods for this. 2 methods. One is to gather the 4 holy relics. There are holy relics in the mountains, in the swamp, in the ruins where the necromancer happens to be right now, and in the forest. You can get holy relics by searching in any of these locations and getting keys. And once you have 3 keys, you can go to a location with a relic, give up the 3 keys, and you get the relic. Now, only while you're holding the Holy Relic can you actually defeat the Necromancer. Without the Holy Relic, it is impossible to win the game. And in fact, under normal circumstances, you can't even damage the Necromancer without holding a Holy Relic, because this game is pretty simple in terms of the dice rolling. You generally roll one or more dice, and you only take the highest result. The Necromancer can only be damaged on a roll of 7. Now you'll notice that this is a normal 6-sided die, so I can only roll up to a maximum of 6. Well, the Holy Relic gives you a +1 to your roll. So pretty much in most normal circumstances, the only way to even defeat the Necromancer in combat, let alone destroy him for good, is by getting that +1 to your roll and rolling a natural 6. But we'll get into that. Everybody has their various ways of manipulating the odds. So, what is the other method for winning? I've never actually seen this happen. I'm not sure if it's even possible, but you can get all 4 of the Holy Relics, or it might be just 3 of the Holy Relics. Let me take a look in the rolls. Alright. Alright. Winning the game. Alright, the Holy Ritual ending, that's the one I'm talking about. The heroes must find 3 Holy Relics. Not 4, 3 Holy Relics. Gather them at the monastery, and then perform the Holy Ritual, which we don't actually have to chant anything or anything like that. Just as soon as the Holy Relics are there, we automatically win the game. The Holy Ritual basically banishes the Necromancer for good. Otherwise, we can use the Holy Relic to destroy his physical form, and presumably he is somehow still alive, sort of like Sauron, but I'm not going to get into the Lord of the Rings right now. Okay. How do we lose? The main way that we lose is if this darkness track gets all the way up to 30 and then continues forward. So, the darkness sort of represents the Necromancer's influence, right? He has already won. He has influence over the rest of the land. But as it goes up, his influence gets stronger. And once it gets to 30, then you're in big trouble. Right now, the monastery is safe. It's protected by this holy aura. Once the darkness gets to 30, though, the Necromancer is able to pierce that aura. Any time after that, the darkness would rise even further. Instead, we get a blight in the monastery. I'll get into blights in a second. But blights generally can't appear in the monastery. Once darkness is in 30, then they're going to start appearing quite often. And we lose if there are ever, I believe, 4 blights in the monastery at the same time. No, 5 blights in the monastery. So 4 blights is fine. 4 blights is the maximum we can have. That's, I think, why I was getting confused. Once we get that 5th blight, immediately it's over. And that's true for pretty much everywhere else. Remember that, well, you obviously don't remember because I haven't told you yet, but in most locations, 4 blights is the maximum. As soon as you get a 5th blight, that's another way that you can get blights inside the monastery. 5th blight in any location spawns inside the monastery instead. So those are basically the 2 ways to win. 2 ways to lose. Technically, the only way to lose is by having 5 blights in the monastery, but that can happen either from other locations being overrun or from the darkness track getting to 30 and then progressing beyond that. Okay. So, what are blights? Blights are up here, and here's another tip for anybody who wants to play this game. I highly recommend you sort your blights, right? There's a lot of them, and it takes a little while because I don't have like a fancy little compartment for all of my blights. You might get like one of those Plano containers, but I don't need them on. I just have a little plastic baggie, and I take about 5 minutes before I set up the game and sort all of my blights into piles. This makes it infinitely smoother and easier when you have to spawn blights during the game. But I digress. Blights, these are representations of the necromancer's influence as well. Some of them are physical, right? We have spies, we have vampires. Some of them are more atmospheric or supernatural or spiritual, right? We have a dark fog, we have oblivion, we have an enigma, right? Webs. And these are all things that don't necessarily harm us directly, but they do make things more difficult when you're in a location. And, again, getting blights into the monastery makes you lose the game. Having blights appear in a location increases the odds that that location will be overrun, sending blights to the monastery, so you want to get rid of the blights. How do blights make your life more difficult? Well, the ones that are physical, the monsters and whatnot, usually you have to encounter the blight at the end of your turn. Okay, so how can you tell if a blight is one that you're going to have to do combat with versus one that just has a sort of passive effect? Easy enough. Take a look at the back of the blight. If you're new to the game, I recommend using the blights, the backside, all the time, right? You don't have to flip back and forth between them, just keep them on their back. You can immediately tell what you're dealing with. As you get more comfortable with the game, I recommend using the front side of the blights, which has very little relevant information on it, but it does have a picture, so you can very clearly visually recognize what you're dealing with, and hopefully you remember the effect. You can also look at the back of the rulebook and see a more detailed verbose description of the blight's effect, which you're going to probably want to reference anyway, because this can be a little vague for the more complicated blights. In any case, take a look at the back of the blight. If it's got a defense and a perception or awareness value, dang it, I just looked up these terms and I've already forgotten them. Strength and awareness, that's it. So if it's got a strength and awareness, that means it's something you'll have to fight at the end of your turn, mandatorily. If you're in a location with one of these blights, you have to fight each of them at the end of your turn. And if you actually win the battle, I don't think that actually does anything. You don't get to defeat the blight for free or anything like that. It's just another way for you to lose health, referred to as grace, and I'll get to that in a second. But many of the blights are not ones that you have to fight. They're ones that have a passive effect. These spies lose one secrecy every turn. We have this taint, which means you can't regain your grace, which is your life. The flux cage, lose one secrecy entering and leaving the location that it's in. We have the dark fog, +2 to difficulty of searches in this location. Searches are very important. That's how you find those holy relics needed to defeat the necromancer. So all of these blights basically make your life more difficult, and they need to be taken care of at some point, but taking care of the blights is not the main goal of the game. The main goal of the game is searching to get those holy relics and then showdown with the necromancer or gathering the 3 holy relics. How do blights spawn on the board? There's going to be some blights on the board in the beginning of the game, but mainly blights spawn whenever the necromancer moves. The necromancer moves at the end of each round. First, everybody has a turn, then the necromancer has a turn. When the necromancer's turn is up, a few things happen. So, first the darkness is increased by 1. Then roll a die, and this is basically the necromancer searching out the heroes. Each hero has a secrecy value. This is this bottom track. If your secrecy is 6 or better, you're pretty safe. However, the lower your secrecy is, the more likely the necromancer will detect you. And actually, in some cases, you want the necromancer to detect you, because you want him to go after you rather than some other player. In any case, though, we roll the necromancer's die to see if he spots the heroes. He detects heroes with secrecy lower than the number rolled. He never detects you in the monastery. If he detects you, he moves toward the closest detected hero by the most direct path. So if you're in the mountains, he's in the ruins, he's going to go to the village, because that is the most direct path there. So if there is a tie between which hero has the lowest secrecy or which is the fastest, most direct path to get to the detected hero, then did I say the most secrecy? Which hero is the least secrecy, the one that the necromancer is going to go after? Then you resolve the tie randomly, and that's generally by rolling a die, right? So if I wanted to decide between the swamp and the village, I would roll a die. I would say, okay, 3, 4, 5 is here. 1, 2, 3 is. I'm doing very poorly today. My words are not coming out correctly. 4, 5, 6 is over here. 1, 2, 3 is over here. I rolled a 5, so he would move toward the swamp. That sort of thing. Okay. If the necromancer does not detect any heroes, then you take the number that you rolled, let's say it was a 2, and you look at these little numbers around the location. A 1, he goes to the forest. A 2, he goes to the swamp. 3 and a 5, he goes to the village. And a 4 and a 6, he stays where he is. So a lot of the time, he's going to be wanting to move toward a particular location or stay where he is, depending on which location he's already in. I mean, if he's in the village, he's not very likely to stay there. But if he's in the ruins, he's much more likely to go to the village than to go anywhere else. Alright, once the necromancer moves, create a blight in his new location. And sometimes he might create more than one blight. So that's how blights get onto the board. Okay, now that we've dealt with blights, let's deal with... Oh, there's one more thing about the blights. If they have a red border on the front of the blight, that means it has a global effect. Most blights only affect the location of that blight. So that's actually a very nice thing, because you don't want to try to keep in mind the effects of 20 different blights on the board at the same time, right? The only one you care about is the one in your location, or the 3 or 4 or 5 in your location. 3 or 4, not 5. 2 or 3 or 4. Those are the only blights that you care about at the moment, unless it's got a red border. Red borders are global, and these have a global, obviously, effect. And the one that comes in the base set is the Desecration, which increases the darkness by an extra 1 each round until you destroy this blight. We also have these other blights that come in the expansions. So that's the last thing about blights. Now, I didn't tell you which blight shows up. So when the necromancer wants to spawn a blight, we're going to use these map cards. And the map cards simply say, we look at the location where he's in, and that is the blight that we spawn. If he were in the village, we would spawn a stigma blight. These map cards are also used when you're searching, and that is one of the main actions that you can take on your turn. The actions in general are move, try to destroy a blight by generally making an attack on the blight. You have to roll, I believe, at or above the number shown. So this spies, which is a 5, you have to roll a 5 or a 6 to destroy the blight. Usually if you fail an attack on the blight, you get a bad thing. This is lose 1 secrecy. So I went to go kill the spies, but they survived, and so therefore I'm going to lose a secrecy. But the general actions are move, combat a blight, or search. Or then there's also use various of your abilities, which I'll get to once I get into the characters. And when you're searching, you typically, again, roll 1 die, and if you roll at or above the search difficulty, then you get a reward. If you get a reward, you draw a map card and it'll tell you what you got. I happen to get lucky here. If I had been searching up in the mountains, I would have gotten a key. Remember, those 3 keys are what you need to get a holy relic. And let's see. Yeah, so that is how you search. And some blights may make searching more difficult. Also, characters' abilities might make it so you get to roll extra dice for searching, which is typically something that you want to happen. What else? Alright, I apologize. I am a little rusty at this. This is my first time playing the game in months, so I'm actually using this rules tutorial as a way to refamiliarize myself with the rules as well. I just remembered that there is a player aid on the back of the hero card, so I'm going to need to dig into the box and get another one of those out so I can actually use it as a player aid, because you don't want to be flipping over the cards all the time because they actually are used to track your grace and secrecy. So the actions you can take on a turn are travel, hide, which means you refresh your powers and gain 1 secrecy, attack, a blight or the necromancer, you lose 1 secrecy for attacking, you gain 1 secrecy for moving. Makes pretty good sense, right? The more aggressive you are, the more you're going to stand out. If you go somewhere else, they're more likely to lose your trail. Search, roll against the search difficulty, draw 1 map card per success and choose the one that you want to get. This is very handy. If you happen to do a search and you get 5 different successes, which is very unlikely, but let's say it happens, you can pick the best one, generally a key. Pray if you're at the monastery to gain grace and retrieve a holy relic. That could be an action, or use a power on your cards. And again, we'll get into the power cards very soon, but first I want to discuss this concept of grace. So typically, if you fail in combat with a blight or combat with a necromancer, many of the physical blights like the zombies and the skeletons have this effect. You get the skull and crossbones. Skull and crossbones means that you are killed, or you would be, but for the grace of God. And that is represented here by this grace value. You can think of it as things like hit points or life points, but really what's going on in the world of the game, because this is, remember, this is like a dark fantasy, and it's a little bit more realistic than a lot of fantasy is. I mean, for a given value of realism. I already mentioned that it's not, they don't use a lot of the standard tropes. And one of the really interesting things about this is this grace idea. So when you get hit or you fail a combat against a blight, they are powerful enough that they kill you. But because you are sort of a champion for good, you get a second chance. You lose one of these grace points, and you are spared. You survive the blow, miraculously. But you only get a certain number of miracles, right? Once your grace runs out, and then you get hit again, you are dead. If any character dies, I believe it is immediate game over for everybody, or it might just be that that one character dies. Let me take a look at that. Let's see. Grace. Let's see. Death of a hero. When a hero receives a death, he either spends a grace or he dies. You do not automatically die when you have 0 grace, you merely cannot spend grace, and the next thing will kill you. Dying does not directly end the game, but it carries some hefty penalties. Okay, so it doesn't directly end the game. Yeah, I remember now. This is like one of those Arkham Horror type of things, where you die, you lose all of your belongings, you raise the darkness, and then on your next turn you get a new hero. And then on the next turn after that, you actually get to take the new hero's first turn. So you lose some time, basically. You lose your progress, you lose some time. So let's talk about powers, because this is the most unique part of the game. So, at the beginning of the game, each hero receives 2 out of 3 of their starting powers. So I have this deck of 10 powers. Each hero has 10 powers altogether. And 3 of these are marked, I just happened to get one right there, with a starting power value. I just took 2 of those at random. You could choose to if you want a little bit of an easier game, but I do 2 at random. You can then gain more of your powers by certain search results mainly, especially the treasure chest, which you want to go to the castle to do that. It's also very easy to conduct successful searches at the castle. Once you get a treasure chest, you can spend that to get a new random power. Or there's other search results that let you draw 2, pick 1. Actually, I think you always draw 2, pick 1. Wow, can't believe I've forgotten that. No, draw a new power card. The supply cache is draw 2, pick 1. And that one is also fairly common at the castle. The powers are unique abilities to that character. They can be passive bonuses, they can be tactics that you use during combat. You can choose one tactic during combat, but your bonuses, you can stack a number of them at one time. Or they could be special actions that you can take during your turn. There's lots of variety to these. Some actions ask you to exhaust them by turning it over. You can't get that action back, or this power back, until you refresh your powers, either by hiding or by a special action that you can take at the monastery. So, I'm going to continue actually setting up these other characters, get them their starting powers, and we'll take a look at them as an example of what powers can do. Wow. That was really lucky. Got first 2 draws. I'm going to move this over a little bit. There we go. And that will probably be part of the next video, because I think I've given enough of an overview of the game that I think we can actually get into the playthrough itself. So I'm going to continue setting up the characters. I will then draw map cards from the top of the deck to set up the starting blights, and we'll get into the game. I still have not discussed event cards. That's pretty simple. You just draw one at the beginning. I believe it's at the beginning of each hero's turn. I'll check that before I get to the next part of the video. And then deal with what it says. I do believe it's at the beginning of the hero's turn, unless they're at the monastery, which protects you from events. That's pretty cool. And there's this artifact deck, which you can get a random artifact by certain search results, not particularly common ones. Alright, look at me. I'm already making mistakes. In fact, I just checked it, and you get 3 out of 4 starting powers, not 2 out of 3. So, although you could probably get 2 starting powers if you wanted to give yourself a little more difficulty. So I'm going to go ahead and get an extra starting power for these guys. I also did not mention this sun token, and that one's very important. That basically tracks whether you have taken your turn already. During the hero's turn, the collective hero's turn, before the necromancer takes his turn, you can take turns in whatever order you want. And one other thing that's sort of unique about this game is that, and what makes managing multiple heroes pretty simple, is that each turn is just one action per character. So if you take an action to maybe set up one of your powers, that's your turn. If you search, that's your turn. If you move to a different location, that's a turn. So turns are very quick and very simple, which is something that I quite like about the game. Let's see, was there anything else? I don't think that was anything else, so we'll get into the game shortly.